Hey everybody, Fabs back here, and I want to take a look at some of my biggest risers and fallers in my 2020 player rankings, which you can find at NFL.com/fantasy. Let's start off with the risers, and at quarterback, Josh Allen. Allen now with Stephon Diggs and John Brown and Devin Singletary in the offensive arsenal. This is a kid who could end up being a top 5 fantasy quarterback in 2020. It's a really deep position, especially at the top, but Josh Allen could become an elite fantasy quarterback this season. Moving on, David Johnson at the running back position. Now, I get it. He's 28 years old. He's had injury concerns over the last couple of seasons. But if you look at his numbers over the first 6 games of 2019, he averaged over 20 fantasy points a game. And now in Houston, he is the absolute bell cow there for Bill O'Brien. So David Johnson, while there's some risk there, he is now well worth drafting in the 3rd or 4th round as an RB2. At the wide receiver position, Calvin Ridley's value has really gone up. He showed flashes of absolute brilliance last year, and now with Austin Hooper gone and in Cleveland, that means even more targets for Ridley. And if you look at his numbers last year when Hooper was out, Calvin Ridley was among the top wide receivers in fantasy football, so his value certainly on the rise. Now let's do some fallers, and Deshaun Watson is certainly a faller. Unfortunately, for those of you who have Watson in dynasty leagues, he loses Nuke Hopkins. He goes from being the 3rd overall quarterback behind Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes to maybe 6th or 7th at that position. So Watson's value certainly falling. And then Phillip Lindsay in Denver would have been drafted as a borderline RB2 flex starter, but then the Broncos added Melvin Gordon, which means what? Lindsay is going to end up being drafted now as more of a 4th running back in most fantasy leagues. And unfortunately, that could end up being a committee situation where Gordon sees more of the work and Lindsay is a compliment. That's simply not good news for his fantasy appeal. And finally, at wide receiver, Christian Kirk, his value certainly takes a fall. Could have been a top 20 fantasy wideout. Now I have him ranked at 35, and that's because Nuke Hopkins and his 150 targets has been traded to the desert. That means Christian Kirk is going to play a secondary role in the passing game. That's going to hurt his ceiling. So even in an offense that's going to score some points, Christian Kirk sees his value take a little bit of a hit with Nuke Hopkins now in Arizona. And those are some of my risers and fallers for my 2020 player rankings. Again, if you want to see the entire list, go to NFL.com/fantasy. And of course, for all your fantasy football needs, follow us at NFL Fantasy.